Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is a talk given by Michael Williams about Agile and EngX approach. Michael has 20 years of experience leading organizations and departments and teams in Agile transformations. He has driven Agile and innovation transformations for a 94-team, 900-person enterprise department with teams in 6 US cities and overseas. Michael's expertise is in producing a culture of continuous improvement. He has his MBA from Duke University, his BA from Washington and Lee University. He's SAFe certified, he's all the certifieds, and just overall great person. Michael, you also are into marathon running. I think you've told me you have a goal to run a marathon on every continent. What's the next one?
That is true, Alexa. First, everybody, great to meet you. Really appreciate the kind words there, Alexa. So yes, that's true. My personal crazy interest and hobby and goal is to run a marathon on every continent. And my next one is actually Antarctica. And pretty excited about it. It's a pretty cool journey, heading down to Buenos Aires, and then down to the southern tip of South America, taking a ship, go down to Antarctica and go down there and see some beautiful sights, the penguins, the glaciers, and all that. And the marathon, check it off my list. That'll be my 4th continent. I've done Europe, Asia, and North America. So yeah, should be a pretty interesting trip.
You'll be halfway there then after
right.
Antarctica. Well,
That's
stay
right.
safe. And before Michael starts his talk, I just want to remind everybody there's a place to submit your questions and also submit any thoughts that you have to Michael. And I'll be monitoring that and letting Michael know when there are some questions coming up, and we'll have the Q&A session at the end as well. So Michael, if you'd like to kick us off.
Yeah, that's great, Alexa. I will echo that. I definitely welcome questions from the audience. Definitely want it to be interactive. We pride ourselves in EPAM and creating tailored, customized solutions. And in that spirit, if there's things in this conversation that come to your mind, please do ask questions. I'm more than happy to address them. So thank you for that reminder, Alexa. Cool. All right. A little bit about this. So yeah, I'm talking about our Agile consulting practice at EPAM. My role at EPAM is leading the North American and Indian Agile consulting practice. I also lead our Global Agile Competency Center, which I'll talk about in a little bit. We provide a lot of service offerings to our own EPAM teams. We've been providing value to customers since 1993, and we've gleaned a ton of value and lessons learned from those engagements. And as I'll talk a little bit later, sort of our unique flavor to Agile consulting is we're part of a larger group called EngX, or Engineering Excellence, that really looks holistically at organizations to include their delivery pipeline, their tooling, basically their sort of the engineering approaches and best practices is something we want to consider in addition to doing things like implementing new safe instances or implementing less solutions. And as I'll say in a few minutes as well, we are methodology agnostic. Alexa mentioned some of the certs that I have, but we really try to bring best practices from every methodology and not get too locked in to one particular approach. Okay, great. So Agile's been around for a bit, and a study from Forbes recently reached out to some execs, and most execs recognize the need and the ability to be agile and have enterprise business agility, but very few of them consider themselves to be that way. There are a lot of reasons for that, as we'll talk about as we get into the call. A lot of good intention, but struggling when it comes to what the particular solution should be. How do we implement it? How does this work with our current ways of working, our current processes? Maybe it's PMO structures, maybe it's incentive programs with HR, whatever it is. But for a lot of reasons, organizations struggle. It's something that leaders know that they want to do more effectively. I think this is a key point. Actually, I saw a pretty interesting video one of our competency center folks shared with us recently, where a lot of the management structures that are in place today were really set in the early 20th century, kind of trying to kind of make human beings be more repeatable, more scalable, almost machine-like. And a lot of those processes and structures are in place today. And as a result, those that aren't adapting find themselves being lapped. And one of the things that we talk about with our clients is, we don't want to be the next business school case study, the next Kodak or Blockbuster that gets lapped because they're not thinking innovatively enough. They're not considering human-centric design in their org structures, in their incentives, how they're encouraging innovation. Are they actually enabling terms like servant leadership? Well, what does that mean, and what does that look like in an organization, and how does that become real? So there are times where companies recognize that there's pain, which we'll talk about in a second, but even when they're not feeling current pain, making sure that they're not getting lapped by their competitors in sort of new operating models. So, and you can see a couple of examples here on the left of how BMW is considering R&D and Apple pivoting kind of their service offering. Zappos is a very common case study of how to get product to market quickly to get rapid feedback, some of those agile tenets that we talked about, but making it real instead of designing something perfectly, releasing it and realize you're missing. And boy, that becomes a costly pivot, whereas we've done it a little bit differently, a little bit more innovatively, creatively to get that feedback, being better positioned for success. So that's something we definitely want to work with our clients on. And then there are times where there are some pain points, and there are some of them. Now, these are just a few samples, but if and when we're working with organizations where there are silos, there are disconnects, one department is kind of driving their own particular agenda. We're not really aligning organizationally, where we're producing output and we're actually measuring outputs, things like everything from velocity to story points being completed or what have you, but not really customer outcome. You're not really validating that we're not only building the thing right, but we're building the right thing. And working with our counterparts, we have a product consulting group at EPAM as well that we partner with a lot to make sure that the right capabilities are being thought through and brought to market, that the customer is pulled in closely to the team. So there is an alignment from roadmap down to product backlog. It's something we want to make sure we're considering. A lot of it gets into ways of working. Like in the bottom middle, I talk about sort of alignment with strategic priorities. So intake, prioritization, budgeting, how we're funding things, those sorts of things, how we're communicating to our stakeholders needs to be looked at. That goes well beyond teaching Scrum or SAFe or what have you, but really kind of gets into making it real and how we work and considering those processes and ways of working in a true Agile solution. Cool. So I talked at the beginning of teeing up that our Agile transformation services are really part of a larger integrated EngX offering. My colleague and peer Igor Minin and Alexei Didik shared some good thoughts, I believe, in some of the EngX parts of this EngX day. And we're certainly tied together, right? So when we talk about a connected organization, we're considering agility, product excellence. This is a partnership that we've created between product coaching, Agile coaching, and EngX, being mindful of some of the technical foundations that are in place to enable. Because if we don't have those technical foundations in place, and teaching methodologies are going to bump into those things, right? So we need to make sure that architecture, our tooling, everything that goes in with our delivery pipeline is considered for how we do a typical Agile transformation. Getting the right metrics and measures in place, more customer-centric, product-focused KPIs and measures, and not just outputs, but outcomes. Getting the right feedback in place, validating the features that we build and bring to market are actually what was intended. And when we get feedback, and we welcome that feedback, that we're able to pivot and do so in a probably the least costly approach that we can. And really with the striving toward high performing teams, having the right metrics and measures in place, and I'll go over a couple of those in a minute, so we typically do. Having the right skill set in place, upskilling is a common part of what we try to do. So when we work with engagements, we're trying to leave the organization better than where we found it, and make sure that they're set up for success. So we do a lot of work internally to, whether it's dojos, hackathons, looking at different skill sets, development that we can do. I'll show a video in a little bit that kind of highlights what our Agile Competency Center brings to the table, but it's all of taking the engineering organization and improving their skill set, improving their ability to deliver without us. So showing them a better way, partnering with them to deliver better ways, working those processes, and then pivoting to make sure that they can stand on their own 2 feet. Cool. So yeah, our Agile Competency Center, a big part of what we try to do to help our own EPAM teams and also our clients. So to not reinvent the wheel, these are some of the goals that have in place, but to not reinvent the wheel, having a repository of great artifacts that we can bring to the table. When we're considering our assessments, that we're not being too narrow in our assessment, that we're considering product agility, engineering excellence, to have a holistic view, to get a real picture of what we can provide lift to. a learning path is something that we have internally that we also bring to market to sell externally. But some service offerings that are in place that enable either by job family, say by Scrum Master or product owner, a learning path for improved outcome, or by particular focus area, if it's a methodology or a particular approach you wanted to take to consider it align. So something that we have in place with our competency center, and we have these sort of guidelines for common types of transformations we have in place. Again, we really try to pride ourselves in providing tailored solutions to that engagement. So a lot of our efforts initially are doing some listening and learning, understanding why clients are where they are. What's really the root cause of some things. We often times we're asked to treat sort of what we call symptoms. Recent example is one where a client said, "Oh, we have a QA problem, we have a testing problem." Well, we went in there, we saw some improvements that we could do from test automation and some of the tools we could put in place. But as we sort of pulled the thread on it, there was really a lack of alignment between product and the engineering organization. There was not clear alignment of priorities, a lot of last minute changing that related to some issues, and sort of QA at the end was sort of caught with this at sort of the end of the process, and was really kind of catching some of the blame, sometimes unfairly. So working with our clients to help understand those sorts of things. We also try to make sure we don't fall in sort of the assessment trap, where we just come in and assess and say, here's what we've learned. We don't want to be paid to learn. We want to provide lift initially. So sort of finding those short-term improvement wins, and I'll go over that approach in a second, but also sort of planting the seed for those longer-term changes that we want to put in place. Cool. So I have a little video here that I want to share. It's pretty short one, I believe less than a minute. Kind of goes over our competency center, the teams that we help. You can see some of the services that we offer. Again, our audience can be internal to our EPAMers and our EPAM teams, but it can also be external and working with our clients. And we draw upon a lot of these service offerings when our consultants are working with clients. So again, they're not reinventing the wheel, but they're able to leverage some of the things that we've already done, in some cases for decades with some of our clients, our longer standing clients. But again, finding the right solution for that client. So I'll go ahead and click play on this and check out this video on the Agile Competency Center. All right, cool. All right, you can see some of the things highlighted in that video that I've already touched on already. But again, we try to look at our Agile consulting approach more holistically than simply coaching Agile. You can see in there working, whether it's particular, if we're doing a cloud migration, or if there's a alignment with product, or yes, engineering best practices and working at the team level. But to really make it stick, we need to get beyond the team level. And that's sort of oftentimes a misconception. Well, we'll think, oh, well, Agile, that's sort of how you make the widgets at the team level. And it's really not. It's really a shift from doing Agile to being Agile, and considering a variety of aspects from an organizational perspective to get that commitment. Working with business leadership to understand their roles in an Agile transformation, understanding there's a trade-off. If they invest more time and energy and provide commitment to embed at the team, program, portfolio level, they're much more likely to get what they want. And so sort of understanding that, and oftentimes we'll deal with some layperson's examples. And if you're doing a home remodel project, are you more likely to get what you want if you're engaging with a contractor on a regular basis, seeing what the team is doing, providing input, or if you just meet with them up front and see you in 6 months and fingers crossed, hope it works out. And the idea, of course, is that the first one, you're much more likely to get what you want, but it requires more of your investment and more of your time. and understanding there's a shift from IT projects to business initiatives, and really understanding that. So getting that commitment from the business, that's definitely something that we want to work with them on, and really understanding a different way to approach things. So our EngX Agile approach, we really try to do things, as I mentioned, at several different levels. Yes, at the team level, optimizing delivery. That's where you kind of the rubber hits the road, so to speak, and kind of what we want to do. But if we just stop there, the impact will be incremental. Yes, we'll have provide lift. There will be improvement, but we really need to consider enterprise ways of working. Again, how we fund, how we budget, how we status report, how we communicate, how we prioritize, just to name a few examples, and then rolling up our sleeves and actually getting into process improvement. This is oftentimes we partner with our business consultants. Within EPAM, a lot of our folks are Agile consultants, are sort of these unicorns who do a lot of different things. But this is where consulting comes in as opposed to just coaching, where we're actually driving solution, and making sure we're considering all these different processes as we work with our clients to provide lift. Yeah, so our EPAM practice, we've got a number of folks. Most of our engagements are run in an Agile delivery model. We have a ton of certified consultants in a variety of language and variety of methodologies, as you see on the bottom right. There's just a few, but we're methodology agnostic. So if we're coming in on say a less engagement, but we see a principle that we can apply from SAFe, maybe it's a weighted shortest job first prioritization, taking example, considering those things as we implement. So not just robotically rinse and repeating a 100-step process for each, certainly having a framework, as I mentioned in the beginning, but again, tailoring it to the particular solution. Just to call your attention of the consulting and coaching, we're intentional with the word pragmatic Agile methodology. We're considered ourselves pragmatists rather than purists. Taking a lot of the spirit that's in place for an Agile approach, but then saying, okay, great, let's see what actually would work here. Okay, this particular organization has a gap in this area. Okay, we're going to work with them on filling that gap from a staffing perspective in the interim. Let's pivot and let's make sure we have the right alignment, the right solution. But we also, as I mentioned before, we'll get our hands dirty with process, but also our product coaching and partnering with our product coaches for having a true product science model, sort of aligning best practices from Agile product DevOps, and really considering that. Project product transformation has become a fairly common request these days, where organizations are recognizing, hey, we've been trying Agile or doing Agile for a bit, but we're struggling with our project delivery, and kind of them understanding that the project way of working needs to change, and really flipping the script on, well, how much would that project cost, to funding more value streams or Scrum teams. And then understanding, okay, it's almost like shifting to a factory model. What you bought is the factory. What you will build is really up to what you prioritize and what you output and what's most important to you. But the cost actually becomes a lot more controllable because it's the cost of the factory. So it's a totally different mindset, totally different way of looking at things. But we are seeing clients getting more and more interested in that product delivery model, moving away from that legacy project approach where they think they have control over cost, over scope, because they have a date and it makes them feel more comfortable, and really kind of working through them to understanding it's a bit of a false perception and a false sense of security. So working through them on more of a product delivery approach. Yeah, this is a great example we try to do. So we always try to paint a picture of what great looks like for our clients. You know, oftentimes you'll hear, oh, we need to pilot something. Well, before you start piloting, what are you piloting toward? And we've had the benefit, as I mentioned before, with the Competency Center and frankly, with just EPAM delivery, of working with so many clients for decades, and kind of taking our own teachings and kind of saying, what does a great operating look like? And what does that look like for your company and your industry? And we do try to tailor approaches based on those things, not only the industry, but also the organization itself. And so making sure we're considering things on some of the Agile tenets that we want to have in place, but also the technical delivery practices and the processes that go with product delivery and product execution. This is just a typical approach. Again, we do a lot of learning when we start, right? Sometimes we don't come in with all the answers already. Certainly we have playbooks and things that we've done in the past, and we've had success stories, but really understanding the organization, doing that current state assessment, what's going on, what are root cause issues, even rolling up our sleeves to some of the tooling that we might be in place and how things are structured. What is some of the history of some of the decisions is something we want to learn too. And then blueprinting what that great target operating model looks like. This is what we want to head toward, and making sure that we're clear on what that is, and having the organization understand what that would mean. And that blueprint should include ways of working and what that means. And the key is to not stop there, but to keep going with working with our clients to make it successful and piloting to get short-term wins. Also to get the confidence understanding of kind of what from the client that, oh, this is a better way to go. I get that sort of change curve, get folks along their change curve and sort of see, okay, now I see why. Having that case for change be clear. Like, why would we go down this path? For what benefit? What's in it for me? What's working against my interests? Those kind of that approach, and understanding there is resistance oftentimes to new ways of working. And then, right, sort of not only piloting to get the wins, but also piloting to get the lessons learned. So as we start to move toward this path of this blueprint, okay, now we see some of the struggles and the challenges, and we need to be mindful of those as we consider others as we scale, and then scale and continue to look into what would work in the next program, the next initiative, and understanding that each area probably has their own little nuance that we need to consider too. And as sort of at the bottom, just to call out being mindful of mindset and behaviors, understanding there's especially a change in leadership, middle management, and even at the team level. And really, when we say servant leadership, what does that mean? One quick example I did at a recent financial services organization. They had a hierarchy in place that had been built for a couple of decades. So they had many layers between the SVP and the team level. And what we actually implemented was a whole approach where this leader's director plus to removing organizational impediments. And the litmus test was, if you were to, I guess virtually now in the COVID world, bump into one of your director plus, you should be able to ask him or her, hey, what are you doing this week to help your teams? What have you done this week to help your teams? And you should get an answer. And so we actually enabled a whole process of a backlog of organizational impediments that was prioritized. We made the VP in this example, the product owner, to set the priority, and director plus were assigned these types of impediments that the majority of teams were hitting that were out of their control to influence. It could have been working with another department and their archaic process, or it could have been a funding issue with their short team members, or whatever it was. So that the teams fed this backlog of challenges, and then leadership met and prioritized them and understood them, root cause analysis them, and said, okay, great, these are the ones we're going to work on. And boy, what a lift that provided to the organization, because the teams could see, oh, these leaders are engaged and they're bought in. This isn't just at the team level, work harder, work smarter, work faster, whatever. This is everybody's in. And that was a real good example. So that was as a behavior example of something that we try to implement with the client, and had some success with it, something we often try to replicate in other clients. So I want to pause there because I'm screen sharing full screen. Any questions, anything coming through, Alexa, that you want me to try to address?
Nothing yet, Michael, from
Okay.
our Q&A, but I am wondering, when you are getting, people reach out to you for an engagement, what do you prefer to know from them about the engagement that helps you with creating the step-by-step approach?
Right. So I think the first things I do is to try to align on what are their objectives, what problems are they trying to solve. And oftentimes it comes in very narrow. The QA example I went and gave before is a very narrow, hey, we have a problem with QA, and try to get them to go a little bit wider first, and understanding there could be other issues at play. So certainly, what goals and objectives are they trying to achieve? I think the second one I want to understand is what has been done to date, what has worked well and what has not. And as best we can, why do we think it has not? Kind of delving into that. And then I want to get into a little bit, if I am being approached by a senior leader in the IT engineering organization, understanding the business's commitment, participation, just awareness of their role in a transformation, those sorts of things. So a lot of it is trying to understand what's been done to date, what's worked well and what hasn't, what do they think the big resistance points are, if any, those kinds of things. Instead of just, what we don't want to do is go straight to, hey, I have a QA problem. Great, let me get a couple of my QA folks on there and we'll solve the problem. Because I think in that case, we would have been remiss, because we're not really solving the root problem. We're trying to solve a symptom.
And Michael, How does what we do differ from other consulting companies and their agile approach?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there are a couple things come to mind. So one is that EngX inclusive approach that we take. So, EPAMs has been providing excellent engineering solutions to clients for 3 decades now. So applying those best practices and lessons learned when implementing a solution. So that EngX approach is certainly one. I think two, and I'll touch on this in a bit too, we try our best to find consultants that do and know more than just an agile methodology, who are comfortable with organizational change management, dealing with the resistance that comes with a change. Human beings struggle with change, even when it makes sense. And so when it's something that comes in that could potentially disrupt their ways of working, or where they've done work for a while, there's going to be resistance. So having practitioners that might be skilled in that, or maybe they're really skilled at business process improvement, but they're really driving solutions and not just coaching a methodology. Those two things jump out, I think, is what I've seen as differentiators from other consulting approaches, who certainly know a methodology, but it's falling short of driving real solutions that last.
Awesome. And Michael, I just wanted to actually ask if you could maybe take a step back. We're getting only half of your wonderful face, the bottom half.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Cool. Well, I'll keep going. If questions arise, please do, as Alexa mentioned in the beginning, try to the chat. And if there are any, please feel free to chime them in. I'd mentioned this is probably another differentiator, Alexa, to add a third example, is our alignment from a product coaching and agile coaching perspective. A lot of times agile coaches can come in and add a lot of value once an organization has sort of developed their roadmap and said, okay, great, I know the ethics that I want to bring to market. Okay, well, what if they don't know? What if they've historically been working in project delivery mode and are not really quite sure what initiatives they should go to market with? And what does that look like? So our product coaching, agile coaching approach and partnership has been another nice differentiator between other folks that just offer the agile coaching. This has happened quite a bit recently. As I mentioned, the project to product transformation, or maybe we're trying with product, but we're not really sure we're getting the right value and outcome. Yes, we're producing output, but is it really the right outcome? And our product coaching, agile coaching joint approach has been a nice offering that's really provided some value to clients where, yeah, they want to move in this direction, but frankly, they lack product coaching talent. Like they have execs and they'll have folks on the business side that do certain function, but they don't have a product family. Maybe the product family is newer. And so the product ownership, product management, business ownership, that those kind of roles aren't really in place. So really working them to build those capabilities and getting those things in place so you can align all the way from vision down to product delivery. Yeah, and I touched on this one earlier, but really the right mindset. And this is something we spent a lot of time with leadership on, not only up front, but if you remember the previous slide, there's sort of chevron on the bottom, it goes all the way throughout the process. And being mindful and plugged into, are you seeing the right mindset and the right behaviors? Do we have leaders who are bought in, and even middle managers who are bought in with seeing the processes being made and getting rapid feedback and being comfortable that if we've gone a sprint and now that we've built it isn't quite exactly what the customer wants, and pivoting, understanding that's okay. Obviously, we want to be as successful as we can each time, but building that in and being comfortable with that. Are we seeing space for innovation? Are we seeing space for different ways of working? Are we listening to our teams on what solutions, since they're the ones closest to the problems? These are mindset shifts that go beyond, hey, are we doing effective PI planning in a safe instance? So being mindful of that, not just at the leadership level, but sort of the middle layers too, and providing that psychological safety. That's something our coaches are really tuned into, and seeing if and when, as I mentioned, there's something didn't quite hit the mark, or if and when there's an idea that's being submitted for a new way of approaching things, challenging, well, this is the way it's always done here. How is that handled? The growth mindset is a great one. It's a great book, actually, Karen Dweck, the Mindsets book, but fixed mindset, right? You know it in growth, I don't know yet, and kind of permeating that through the team, something that we want to make sure that we encourage, and we're being mindful of that it's in place. This is just a typical engagement we do. So I mentioned before that sort of current state assessment, blueprint, but also piloting, right? So we don't want to just sort of be brought in to learn. Yes, we want to be learning, but we really want to make sure that we have the right lift in place as we start. So piloting the wins to only get the confidence that we're in the right place, but piloting to get the, now that I understand that, I might change how we do things. So don't go too wide, too fast. We don't try to boil the ocean straight away with initial engagement. It's understanding things, painting a picture of what great looks like, and then piloting and driving some of those initial wins. Again, there's some sample things that we would do in an engagement. Okay, what are some of the things you would produce? What are some of the activities you would do? Obviously, I won't read bullet by bullet, but we're pretty thoughtful in what we try to do. And this is sort of a starting point. So when we're engaging with clients and we're saying, okay, great, what would we do in each of these phases? It's going to be tailored to that particular customer's needs. They might have some very specific instances. They must have some safe instances or whatever. That's fine. We'll look into that. But in those initial due diligence type meetings, really making sure we tailor this to that customer's needs. But really, the end of the day is that we're providing lift and improvement quickly, and we're showing longer term improvement possibilities. And just some samples of some of the things that we produce. Again, clients will often ask this, what would I be getting in a particular engagement? So in addition to some of the outcomes that we want to stress to them as being critical, we'll also show them some of the artifacts that we would typically produce, understanding the assessments that are in place, that will show improvement action plans, that will show sort of quarter by quarter what we expect to see. By the way, those assessments can be done both at the team level and organizational. They are going to be different usually, and different things we would measure. The assessments should be inclusive of those engineering excellence type practices that was mentioned before, but also sort of product capabilities we talked about. A lot of these are examples because it depends. Has a client already done value stream mapping? Do we feel it's been done appropriately? If not, that might be something we consider. We definitely want to look at their measures, their OKRs, their customer-centric KPIs, if they have them. If they don't, going through the right exercises there. Certainly a roadmap of improvement recommendations, again, short-term and long-term. And a lot of it depends. But oftentimes, call your attention on the middle left, we get into process change. And what would that mean? So now we've done the value stream mapping. Now we've identified roles and responsibilities. Let's look at your current ways of working and how would we propose modifying them? And this is, again, where change curve comes in. Well, if that's not how we typically have done it, or if we run into some PMO processes that we're required to do A, B, and C, that's what we want to start to work with the organization on, of how they can pivot and evolve. And it's not just IT team level ways of working. Just to sample some of the things that we would do in some of the Agile maturity levels. We'll look across teams. We'll look at a variety of factors that I'll touch on in a minute. But really having leadership understand what we see as working well, what the improvement items are. We try to make our assessments as binary as we can. So it's not just the coach or consultant's gut feel, but there's some rhyme or reason to the results. But we consider a lot of different things. Obviously, to include Scrum ceremonies and roles and responsibilities and how a Scrum Master is performing his or her role. But the culture, this is where a lot of it gets into. Do they feel there's trust in leadership? Do they feel connected to a strategic vision? Things that leaders would assume, oh yeah, everybody's bought in, everybody understands that these are the right things to do and why. Things get lost in translation. When you get down to the team level, they lose connection with where we're going and why. Really understanding the value that's created. And having good measures. So again, we're not done once we produce the feature, but really validating that it was the right feature and it's what the customer wanted. Certainly, we look into some of the nuts and the bolts, if you will, at the team level. Do we have a ready state backlog? Do the teams have good ways of working in team norms, in agreements in place? Are ceremonies too dominated by one or two strong voices? Are we encouraging the quieter folks to participate and engage? Things like that. So we become more of a team as opposed to one or two folks. Certainly looking at the right outputs, measures in place too, to include the roles and responsibilities. Is the product owner engaged? Are we providing the right level of feedback? Do we have the right amount of participation? Things like that we'll really take a look at. And of course, some of the technical aspects. So Alex had asked before, which sort of differentiates, and we do believe our engineering excellence practices that we take a look at in combination with some of the other ones that we put in place really help enable us for some better outputs and results for our clients. Great. And I think the other differentiator that we have is, EPAM provides a lot of value in a lot of different ways. So if and when we're engaging with a client, realize, we could really use some help from our cloud practice in this particular engagement, pulling in the SMEs from that area that we feel could add a lot of value is something we want to do. We're actually a bit intentional in that in our staffing. So there's not a sort of an add-on, so to speak, but we have sort of a role that can flex, that can say, based on what we're going to see in there, especially if we want to add that lift in value in the first couple of months, so we're able to pull that lever and say, okay, great. In this example, let's pull in somebody from the cloud practice and see if we can help here a lot. Yeah, so I mentioned this a little bit before as a differentiator. I'm very proud of our Agile consultants. They're really unicorns. Yes, they know methodologies like Lesson, Safe, and Scrum, but really there to drive customer value, customer-centric delivery. Job's not done. Even on that first phase project, and we felt that lift and that impact. It really helps set the stage for that wider reaching transformation. It comes to sort of operating design and the processes that are in place, and even potentially working with our clients on upskilling and, again, trying to leave that organization better than where we found it, really positioned for excellence in their particular industry.
Michael, I have a quick question on that topic. So when it comes to, what we do as Agilists here at EPAM, because there are so many people who work in all of these separate areas, what we kind of are able to do is go in there and say, from a value and like almost philosophical, cultural perspective, like, are we all sharing the same vision? Are we being agile in our approach to solving problems? Because part of the reason why we work with so many different areas of EngX or EPAM is that Agilists are helping to diagnose the problem, or diagnosticians, and helping to kind of recommend what works and helping people to experiment with things. Would you agree with that assessment, or do you feel like it's a little bit different or nuanced?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit nuanced in the sense that, yes, our Agile consultants can do a lot of different things, and they can recognize when they need expertise in other areas. So they can know enough, as I mentioned in the cloud example before, where one of our Agile consultants might be a certified cloud practitioner, but really what they need is a SME in that area to come in and help and provide that lift. So the intent more of this slide is that, hey, they can do a variety of different things. And really this slide is more trying to articulate the point that, well, EPAM has a lot of different specialized expertise in certain areas. So, one of our EngX consultants might be able to come in and go, hey, great, I've taken a look at your architecture. I'm going to pull in a SME to really kind of look under the hood and see what we need from the solutions architecture point of view. So something like that. So it's the ability to provide that tailored solution that draws upon our strengths from an engineering excellence point of view. But really that they're all in the spirit of consulting to drive better outcome instead of coaching a particular approach. That was a great question, Alex. Cool. So I'll just highlight a case study we've done with one of our clients. This, as I mentioned before, sort of in these project delivery models. We had a client that had a very fragmented set of projects, ad hoc requests that were coming in, a lot of legacy processes and creating project charters and business cases, all good intent. And there's rationale for each of them, but there's kind of working with them to say, hey, there's a better way of working. Spent a good bit of time doing some value stream mapping with them, understanding the processes that were behind their current ways of working, sort of redrawing the lines around work structure, and client being open and willing to shift. So shifting from projects to these agile work streams, sort of feeding work to the teams instead of moving work to different projects, having a little bit more consistency in the team staying together over time, really making that case for change. This is key with a mindset that I talked about before. So not just that leadership understood why we might be trying to do something a little bit different way, but having everybody down to the team level, really understanding what was in place. And we were able to get a nice solution that was able to get more of that value stream end-to-end operating model. So it was a nice win to come in. And it really, I think, credit to the client for being willing to adapt to this new mindset, for being willing to consider new ways of organizing work. and really working through the comfort level and the change curve on our business stakeholders to understanding, okay, I'm going to shift from, all right, I've funded this project with this end date, and sort of understanding some of the how flawed that can be and how oftentimes that fails. And it's not because IT is struggling, it's just more of a way of working that needs to be updated. And they were willing to buy in. And so it was a nice way for us to transform. And just maybe a quick, the second one, this is where a shift to this project to product playbook. We had a lot of challenges with delivery, disconnects between what the client wanted to what was produced. The organization struggled a bit in some of their roles, their career paths. So they were doing a lot of the upfront planning, a lot of waste energy and things. They didn't react very well to change. So what does that look like? What can we do a little bit differently? So moving towards shorter product release cycles, defining the product roles, working with the business to understand how they can step in and help, shifting left in some of our practices, looking at testing a different way instead of it's just the UAT responsibilities, understanding where quality can be embedded, things like that. So we're able to implement this whole playbook in a particular area that was able to be leveraged for other parts of the organization to enable scaling. So again, getting some feedback from there and then tailoring it to the next area that they could move towards. So another nice project product EngX type solution. So I believe I've left a few minutes hopefully for some Q&A. Alexa, looks like we might have some things in the chat here too. Is there any in the other channel as well? Move back.
Sorry, I'm on mute and I didn't even realize it. Apologies.
Of course.
We don't have any in our Q&A at the moment, but if anyone would like to add them, I can go ahead and ask Michael some questions from there. I do have a question though, in regards to your discussions about like when our Agile consultants are going in, what are the most common challenges that they're facing when they are initially engaging with the client?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there are two thoughts that come to my mind. And I think one is organizational or individual resistance to change. And I think the other are the company processes and ways of working that get in the way of a new operating model. So for the first one, it could be PMO is resistant to their process or change, like, well, this is the way we do things, that kind of a thing. We've always done it this way, that type of a thing. Or it could be, hey, my role is team leader, or my role is a project manager, or my role is something like that. And like understanding that, I might need to evolve my skill set and how I add value to the organization. And that can be threatening. That can be intimidating. And that fear gets in the way. That's where resistance can start to permeate through the organization. So recognize that even before we start. I think it's understanding that we're working with our clients to address that resistance and to spend time and effort in working through them. And we actually have a great organizational change management practice that we'll often lean on to. Again, similar to what the example I gave before with the cloud practice. Our consultant may know cloud, but it's like, okay, this is getting heavier. Let me pull in a partner from cloud. Same thing with the change management. Can our consultant handle it, or do we want to pull in somebody from OCM practice? But if we don't address that resistance, that culture will win, and good intended transformations will struggle. So that is certainly, I think, one of them. And the other one is I mentioned, is a process one, where how projects are funded or how initiatives are funded, how initiatives are communicated, how change is handled. Is there a change control board kind of an approach sort of things that gets in the way of an Agile delivery model? So that's probably the second one that I see probably the most common. Certainly there are other areas that could be challenges where, again, an organization might be lacking skill set or talent in a particular area, and there's a staffing gap. One client that comes to my mind was they really didn't have any product managers, and they really needed to find them. So they were trying to figure out, hey, can I upskill or train another job family in here? And we advised against a pure lift and shift, and we're looking at more functional capabilities, but even then there was some gap and they had to hire. So things like that. That would probably be the third example where they just don't have the right capability or capacity in place. And maybe the fourth one is if they don't have the right architecture tooling in place. So that's where EngX consultants can help and kind of come in and say, okay, great, this is why we'd recommend you change and align a little bit differently and consider it. So again, are they willing to change? Are they open to change? Are they open to new ways of working? Are they open to new processes? And day is a pretty big day. That's like an organizational day. So even our quote unquote, our buyer or sponsor might be on board. It's not just convincing him or her, it's also convincing these various aspects of the organization. Because if you don't address the team leader, project manager, PMO, just to name a few examples, and their fear or resistance to this new world, it's going to get painful. So recognizing that going in and being mindful of it and solving for it as you go.
Yeah, vision alignment, expectation setting, all of that good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
We do have a couple of questions for our Q&A.
Great.
Yuvraj mentions or asks, how can we see the Scrum Master role evolving over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, that's a great point. So there's a couple of things. So I think it depends upon the maturity of the particular team, right? So like more mature teams really benefit from the Scrum Master being almost that local team coach. More mature ones can really leverage the Scrum Master to be more facilitator and enabler, and really working with leadership on those org impediments that get in the way of the particular team. So being vocal and challenging, well, that's just the way it is here. We all know working with department X is going to be clumsy because of the working, and having the Scrum Master work with leadership to try to remove more of those org impediments. I think it's also important that Scrum Masters have a career path themselves. So how do they evolve and grow their muscle, and how do they grow? But yeah, it depends on the maturity of the team. But I think ensuring to add value, continuing to upscale. Scrum is not, in that particular example, one that just sets and forgets. So staying fresh and relevant on the latest thoughts and approaches from your Scrum Alliances of the world. And as we look at different ways of working, I think the Scrum Master can also be sort of an innovation enabler, making sure there's capacity set for the team to make sure we try new ways of working, making sure that's something that we look at the Scrum Master to help enable.
Excellent. Yeah. And Paulo has another question for us here. How do you bring the client to align or engage in that shift mindset from project management to product management vision? Any insights that you can share on that process? Obviously, it's going to be a little bit different for every client.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts?
Great question. And I think the customer, the client, I think is probably a couple of different aspects of that. I think there's sort of the IT engineering side, and there's also the business side. So a lot of it is recognizing that there's a need to do a behavior change. So again, that case for change. So why would you even do it? What problem are you trying to solve for? Why would you even try to solve it? What is the benefit of operating in this sort of new delivery model or new approach? And then helping work through what does that mean, right? Because getting past the slideware, if you will, but what does that mean day to day that would be different? What would we be asking on the business side of your folks if they're going to engage in some of these roles and work with these teams? What is that time investment? On the IT side, it's really understanding how your leadership and middle management add value, and having them make it clear that what they expect as a senior leader on the IT side for their directors or middle managers to do to add value is changing. And that's what we're going to be using to assess their performance, and not just, hey, are your projects green? Are you under budget? That kind of a thing. But they're doing more to show what they're doing to help their teams or their programs achieve different results. So that's what a lot occurs up front in that sort of initial stage. We're doing current state assessment, but we're also working with leaders on that different mindset and that different approach. It's a great question, because as I mentioned, that if you don't address that really gets in the way. If you don't address the mindset, if you don't address the behavior change, it really comes down to, yes, there's improvement, but it's more incremental. It's more, yes, teams are working more effectively. They're able to produce and prioritize more effectively, but if they bump into middle management getting in their way, they bump into their team leader, or they bump into the business who hasn't really bought in and hasn't changed their behavior and their day-to-day ways of working, the improvement will be limited. So being mindful of that and educating our stakeholders in the beginning is something we spend a lot of time on.
Yeah, definitely. It's like trying to hold that same vision across leadership, across the teams, and not just aligning once, but that feedback loop of of having the continuous conversation to bring people back to that vision
Yeah,
over
and that's a
time.
good that's a good word, Alexa. I think the continuous, right? It's not just set it in the beginning and expectation setting, but as we're assessing the teams and the program, the organization, we're having those honest conversations with the client. If we see resistance in a particular area, we don't see the right mindset or behavior change, it's not enough to just set the expectation up front. We need to continually stay on top of it and see, okay, based on what we're seeing, we're still seeing some pain in this area. And this is what we'd recommend to do differently. We recommend having a workshop on this, or we recommend having a one-on-one with that, or whatever it is. But staying with that finger on the pulse that we're continuing to have the right mindset and behavior change.
Absolutely. And Gordon, hello, Gordon, one of our wonderful Kanban trainers. He's asking if he can access these assessments for a client because he's being asked to help a client. And so how would he gain access to these tools?
Yeah, the Agile Competency Center is a great place to start. So I'm happy to check with you offline, but the ACC is a great repository of our artifacts. And we also have our own consultants who are available to help too. So don't feel like you need to do all the lifting on your own. So we're here to help. But yes, we have a repository of artifacts, whether it's Kanban, less Scrum, what have you. So yes, we could certainly help you with that. And we can take that offline and get you the actual email address if that would be helpful.
Yes, you can always reach out to the org competency center email. I think it's org.agilecc@epam.com, if I remember
Yes,
correctly.
that would work just fine.
And Michael, are you going to make a copy of this deck available as well? There were some questions about wanting to look more at the slides. The text was a little small for them.
Oh, okay, that's good feedback. Yeah, I'll coordinate with the event coordinators to see if they're coordinating, if they're doing individual presentation distribution or if they're doing some central site repository. But yeah, I'm sure we could look into that. Cool. Any other questions coming through?
Sorry, I'm really bad about muting myself, apparently. I was just saying that was the last of our questions. And so if you all would like to stay with us, we have one more speaker for EngX Day. Steve McConnell will be speaking next about his career path and experience. Thank you very much, Michael, for this wonderful talk and for bringing us more information about how Agile and EngX work together. Well, as a part of EngX.
Yeah, no, it was a great opportunity. I really enjoyed it. Great conversation, good questions as well. So happy to have participated. Thank you.
How can people reach you if they have more questions, Michael?
Sure. It's Michael_Williams@epam.com. We'll do it right there, right to my email. Got me there.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Awesome, guys. Thanks for your time.